the RTÉ Rugby World Cup podcast, sponsored by Bank of Ireland.
Hello and welcome along to the RTÉ Rugby World Cup podcast, where the show is going on. Ireland may be eliminated, but we're still cranking the podcasts out 2 a week until the end of the tournament. Coming up a little bit later on in the pod, I'm going to be chatting to journalist Illtud Dafydd about what the reaction has been on the ground in France to the hosts being knocked out of the World Cup. But first, though, it's time for the post-mortem of Ireland's Rugby World Cup campaign. I'm joined by Johnny, Holland and BJ Botha to talk through it all. BJ, I promise we will give South Africa their credit a little bit later on. First, though, we are going to have to talk about Ireland. In general, for the two games overall, BJ, I mean, was that the best weekend of World Cup rugby we've ever had across those four games, and in particular Ireland, New Zealand, and France, South Africa, or France, South Africa in Paris on Sunday night?
Yeah, it's unquestionable. There's really the standard of rugby played, especially back-to-back games, is definitely the best I think the Rugby World Cup has ever seen. And also arguably maybe the two best, games of rugby ever played in the modern era. It was just unbelievable. It had everything. Emotion, as we know, with Rugby World Cup, and just attacking and defense, and heartbreaking moments. It just had everything. Really a great spectacle for rugby. I think obviously, unfortunately, someone had to come short on the other side, and really kind of guts for Ireland. I think they, I don't want to say a team deserved more, but I think Ireland definitely deserved the semi at least. And I suppose having the chat with people, I've seen that obviously these in our ideal world, I think should have been semi-finals. I don't think those games are worthy of a quarterfinal, if that makes sense. I think it was definitely semis that we were watching there, and with all respect to the other teams, that's sometimes how the pool stages go, and we can talk about the draws 3 years ago and all this sort of stuff, but it is what it is, and just unfortunate for Ireland.
Yeah, I think in terms of the draw, I think Johnny, I think it's something that we should be talking about maybe in a few weeks' time or in a month's time, because I don't want the talk of just this draw to overshadow what we kind of need to talk about with Ireland's performance and things maybe that do need to change. To just continue on the point of just how brilliant those games were and how excellent as a neutral, I would say, the Ireland-New Zealand game was. Like, there was a brilliant stat from Opta Johnny, not you now, actual Opta Johnny, the Opta stats board on X yesterday. So 5 minutes 19 seconds. That's how long Ireland's final 38 phases of rugby were against New Zealand. New Zealand, right to start the game, had their 27-28 phase possession, which lasted 3 minutes and 18 seconds. Up until that game on Saturday night, no match at the World Cup had a single possession that lasted longer than 2.5 minutes. And here we were, this World Cup quarterfinal, bookended by 27 phases from New Zealand and 38 phases from Ireland. And just I think that just sums up how enthralling an 80 minutes of rugby it was. 41 or so minutes of ball in playtime. It was just remarkable stuff.
It was absolutely outrageous. And I think, I can't remember who I said it to the other day, but France and South Africa was probably the better spectacle, but it just shaded Ireland, New Zealand. And I think that's because I think objectively, if you were looking at Ireland, New Zealand without the emotion, I think you could have seen that as well, that you could flip a coin. Either one of them they were both great spectacles. But I think when you see Dalton Papali'i came onto the pitch, I can't remember what time, was it 60 minutes or so onwards, and there's a picture of him, or the video footage of him at the very end of the game, and he just dropped to one knee, and you could see that he was spent. It was a 37 phase play, obviously, and being a back row, trying to get the turnover and everything else. I assume I didn't play or cabin, but I assume he put in an enormous amount of effort, being a fresher player on there. But it was absolutely outrageous seeing someone like that dropping to a knee after the effort. You could see as well, there was jogging going on. Tyke Byrne had a carry where the ball was popped to him and he was like, "Oh no, go again." So it was we were tired looking at that phase, I think, but it was showed how close it came at the very end, and both teams went to the very end. It was an unbelievable spectacle. Much like the South Africa-France game. I mean, they both went down to the final play and big plays in the final play as well, with Faf de Klerk getting a rip and Sam Whitelock getting a turnover. So yeah, it's hard to separate them, but we were treated to unbelievable rugby, just on the wrong end of the result, unfortunately. And Brendan's accent has gone a very, very South African at the moment. His Irish twang has gone after the weekend.
Settle down. And obviously big moments
like you mentioned, the 37 phases. I went back on Sunday afternoon and I was looking. I wanted to see like which Irish players were logging the most carries in that, and just like what was the breakdown of who had the ball. And you look like Jack Conan carried 6 times in those 5 minutes. Tyke Byrne, Jimmy O'Brien, and Ronan Kelleher all put in 5 each. And there was another. You're talking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 9. I think there was 11 or 12 players had a carry in it. I'd love to do the similar breakdown and see how many tackles certain New Zealand players put in over that few minute period as well. But Johnny, one of the most frustrating things about this game and this World Cup is because it's ended in the quarterfinal, it's automatically going to just get filed away in the quarterfinal defeat section of Irish rugby history. But when you look at it, like, it's just so frustrating because it was not like Wellington in 2011 where Ireland never landed a shot, or Cardiff in 2015 against Argentina, or Tokyo in 2019 against New Zealand, where they were just blown out of it instantly and were just constantly chasing and could never really get back into it. This was, okay, they were 13-0 down, but this was a game that they had several chances to win and just couldn't land that final blow.
Yeah, I think it will be frustrating because I think there's a lack of maturity from certain corners when you talk about Ireland's quarterfinal bow out. I think this was so different. It'll be used against them and it'll be a slagging match at some stage from the different nations, especially when you get into the next World Cup. But and you can talk about the draw, and it should be a semi-final and all that. Ireland would have gotten past might have gotten past the quarterfinal if the draw had gone differently, but they still wouldn't have gotten what they wanted if they played this game in a semi-final and got knocked out, because then they were so close to possibly going on and winning it. So I think the quarterfinal talk is cheap. The game itself was, worthy of, you think you're going to see the winner from those 2 quarterfinals. So obviously we know what was at stake and how well they went, but it is going to be frustrating when this is held over them. Like you said there, they were so close. 18-17 with Aaron Smith off the pitch, and Ireland had a couple of chances. And I don't want to be critical of them. I mean, they played the game and you have to be bold. I would have gone for the post at 18-10 and gone 18-13 and stayed within a score, because I was afraid that New Zealand, if they got outside of that 8 points, wasn't it, that they'd be very, very hard to claw back. But Ireland went brave and they got 18-17 through the James Gibson Park peel off the 6+ maul. But it was in the second half of it when I thought they had some chances to fire that shot. And I think if it was South Africa, they would have gone tighter to get ahead. Ireland never went ahead and they never really rattled New Zealand that way. I think if they had gone ahead, it would have been a different story. And unfortunately, a couple of those plays were they came off a maul and hit up the middle, and James Gibson Park turned and kicked it to Pete O'Mahony with a crossfield kick up over Richie Mwanga, who was covering the wide defence where Aaron Smith would normally cover it. Obviously, they're similar size players, so mightn't have changed what they were planning on doing regardless. They might have been kicking it on Aaron Smith. There might have been something they were looking at some stage, but geez, I'd love to have kept that tight. Go for the line, if not, grind out a penalty and go ahead. I think that's what South Africa would have done. I think that's what France would have done. They would have rumbled a bit better without giving away cheap possession with a contestable in the air. I know if he caught it, it's a magic play and they're gone ahead. But I think in hindsight, at least, you could have kept that a bit tighter and gotten your score to go ahead. And then it's a different game and a different pressure on New Zealand. And I think there was a couple of plays like that. I know the one that didn't bounce up for Dan Sheehan, that was kind of speculative. It was a good decision maybe, but
yeah.
There was one other where James Gibson Park turned and threw the long pass that Aaron Smith intercepted. And I think they were 2 big chances where Ireland could have built that pressure. And I know, you can go back and say New Zealand had their number in defence. They weren't letting anything in easy, but you get a penalty. They got penalties already early in the game. Ardy Surveyor not rolling away and all those kind of small ones. You might have gotten a penalty to go ahead. And I think they might, if they have regrets, that's going to be one of them.
Yeah. And BJ, one of the big differences between last year's series against New Zealand and the match on Saturday night, as you look at the difference in the New Zealand pack and how they've changed over the last 12 months. And so many people have been giving a lot of credit to Jason Ryan for the work he's done there. We'll get to the scrum in a few minutes, which was obviously huge. But even if you just look at the back rows specifically, Richie McCaw came out afterwards and said that was probably the best game he's ever seen Sam Cane play for the All Blacks. He put in 2 absolutely enormous tackles on Caelan Doris in the first 15 minutes, and that pretty much shut Doris down for the game. On one of those, Artie Savea gets in over the top and wins a penalty. That makes it 6-0. Savea came up with a handful of penalties at the breakdown as well throughout the game. The back row trio of Savea, Kane and Frizzell, when you look back on it, completely outplayed the Irish back row.
Yeah, they did. And I suppose if you ask the question, where do you go to counter Ireland, is the breakdown. And where do you start that is by the tackle. Dominant tackles, slow that ball down, and then that allows the line to come up and hopefully get in their faces. I think that's the one area that teams have tried to come out. I suppose that's why South Africa ran so close could have been either way with Ireland, and they don't enjoy that. They don't enjoy that ruck, and I suppose that comes from a little bit maybe of the Joe Smith era. And he basically probably knew that as well going in, and I suppose understanding that kind of in your face around the ruck time, and that they got that through to kind of to an extent. But I think they did it consistently, and I suppose the consistent part is kind of where I sit with these games. The high speed, just relentless pace of it. And I've kind of asked the question along the way about Ireland's depth, and I wonder, as this kind of come back to kind of bite them in the minutes played by players. And we saw these mistakes that were uncharacteristic at the end, kind of continuously looking after that breakdown to set the backs up. And in the latter parts of the stages of the game, I just felt those errors were not like Ireland, and the decisions made around that. And look, you can't miss line out ball either in set piece. But I suppose as we've seen, New Zealand started very quickly on the front foot. And I suppose I'll ask the kind of question of, should subs be or can you make subs earlier? And I suppose going in this tournament, it's one part real science about rotating your players. And I don't want to use South Africa as a comparison, but if you see any spectator can see Khaleesi going off at 45, Libok going off at 45, Reinach going off at 45, all these players that are your starters going off at 45, it doesn't happen. I suppose that's what the depth, I suppose, when you talk about players that, and Johnny touched on it, you still got a semi-final, a final to go. These players are spent. I mean, that was just a massive game to exhaust yourself. In the sense of their goal was to win it, I suppose, as Ireland were to, and you kind of see yourself, did it show then in the New Zealand game that they couldn't play until that, to that last minute, because that's what you need to do against New Zealand.
Yeah, and like you talk about fatigue, I can't help thinking that when I see after Ronan Kelleher had been held up over the line and there's the goal line dropout, which Caelan Doris knocks on. And if you look at it from the wide angle, like he's hanging back and you can almost sense the moment where he realized he's kind of underestimated the flight of the ball and he has to run up to catch up to it. And that's where the spill arrives. And you kind of wonder, does a fresher player, a fresher mind, the fatigue seeping into the mind, does he just take his eye off the ball for that half a second?
Yeah,
how important
100%.
That could potentially be.
100%. And it's just that kind of consistent steadiness. And I suppose that's what kind of New Zealand got right. They stayed consistent, and when they got ahead, they knew they just had to make the tackles. Ireland was still making those kind of inroads. They just had to make the tackles, stay consistent. I suppose in the French, South African, I'm going to touch on later, but again, stay in the fight. They're going to make meters. They're going to score tries. However, when there's the chance to turn over the ball and turn that momentum, they do. And I suppose at the end part there, yeah, it was basically kind of those small little margins we talk about in games, that those are the ones that win. I mean, a simple catch, the kind of penalty to the latter parts of the stages, again, just a little bit of a brain, kind of explosion of what was going on there in our thoughts. And those are all fatigue. Like, that's all related to fatigue. And I suppose that's key in the World Cup, because again, I suppose it's that science about managing. You need to win the game, but you also know in the back of your mind, if you're going to go through the semis and finals, you need them. So it's a real difficult managing role from a coaching staff, and I suppose, unfortunately, Ireland fell on the other side. I think it was a big, it wasn't that they weren't capable. It just, I feel that it was a big part of minutes played throughout the tournament. If you see Ireland have a high number, for their main players, so I suppose that also leads to things like the set piece.
Yeah, and before I come back to the set piece, Johnny, like obviously the other one on that kind of fatigue issue or potential tiredness or anything like that, and where we were kind of going into potentially Monday morning quarterback stuff here, but Jack Crowley obviously didn't play. Looking back at it now, would you have brought him on for Johnny Sexton in those final 10 minutes, or were you happy for it? Like, Johnny Sexton, arguably the greatest Irish player ever. Are you on the side of the fence that, no, I actually want him out there? I don't really care if he's a little bit tired. He's the man that can actually make something happen.
I think when I'm thinking about these things, I always put my actual coaching hat on. And if I was in that situation, I don't think you take Johnny Sexton off at all. Like, obviously, I'm a Jack Crowley fan. Like, I know him pretty well. But I still don't think you do it. Like, if I was coaching there, I don't think I would. If any coach in the world, including Andy Farrell, had the benefit of hindsight, he'd have changed it just to see. But you couldn't do that the first time round. So no, I don't think you would. I think he's your general. Even if he's like, at times, I thought at 60 minutes, I thought he was quite tired. But then again, there was moments late on in the game where he actually got going. I think if you looked at some of his early moments, that's how he's playing the game anyway, just facilitating things quite a bit, So yeah, it's easy to judge it afterwards. I don't think. I'm not sure if many people would have made that if they were the ones sitting in the coach's box. But I think it's very interesting if you go back to the breakdown part of it, because the breakdown is winning and losing of the game. And if you look at New Zealand's first effort, the 20-odd phases that you said, it ended up in a Tyburn not rolling away penalty, and they went 3-0 up. That is a direct comparison to the Scotland game, where Scotland weren't as good at the breakdown on both sides of the ball. Now, I mean, like, New Zealand arrived so early at their breakdown that Ireland couldn't get in there, and they couldn't get the turnover. If you look at Caelan Doris getting the turnover against Scotland in the first phase of play, first long phase of play against Scotland, they got out instead of going 3-0 down. And maybe because Scotland, they were going to the corner and stuff anyway, but Caelan Doris got the turnover and Ireland didn't. And in fact, if you arrive early at the breakdown, you're going to end up trapping a player in. And I think Tyburn did try and roll away. He just got trapped.
Oh, yeah, it was very, like, I saw when I watched it back on Sunday straight away. I think it was Ethan de Groot. He kind of like clamps his legs around him. And in fairness, it was excellent and very, very smart play by de Groot.
That's what you do when you arrive at the breakdown first.
Exactly,
Like, yeah. I don't know. I don't think the player gets there and says, "Oh, I'll trap him in." I think they get into a position, they see they have him trapped, and they don't let him out. So it's fascinating the direct comparison between the two games when you're talking about a different level of a different animal from New Zealand and their arrival at the breakdown being so.
And also on that, like, what a stupid player or someone who was a little bit less savvy would probably do is probably drops a shoulder and tries to absolutely clean burn out of it and puts himself in, at the risk of getting a yellow or red card. But sometimes the sneaky thing to do is the right thing to do.
They've gone on the front foot and scored first against Ireland, which Ireland normally do that. But I think, like, the breakdown as well, because and BJ said it, the contact, Sam Cane, 2 massive tackles and Caelan Doris. But around the pitch, I think you saw Ireland kind of playing outside of their structures a little bit less comfortable than what they have been in the past, because, if you're worried about your breakdown or if you get hit behind the gain line, you have to send someone else, and then they're gone from a different pod. And you see the Josh van der Fleer one, he got turned over. I can't remember who turned him over there. But
yeah, it was after himself and Bundyaki had just got up off the ground and given
exactly.
Arc probably took the wrong option, left him. Yeah.
So Bundyaki wasn't even looking. He reloaded because he assumed they were going to go the same way like they normally do, and there was something happening on that side. So Gibson Park came the other way. Josh van der Fleer is on his own, and they're outside of their structures. And what I mean by that is they don't have their pods together. They don't have the support there, and then it's a turnover. And they're the kind of things that frustrate you. But it's very easy to say, oh, when the pressure came on, they came outside their structures. But New Zealand have forced all of this. Like, I think anyone saying that Ireland underperformed are giving New Zealand a complete lack of credit, because they were absolutely ferocious and phenomenal game played by them, tactically and strategically all over it. And you get onto the set piece, but I think the kick battle is something that you need to talk through as well, because it's a massive part of winning and losing that game.
Yeah, I have it here. That was 17 minutes. Van der Fleer. It was Sam Cane who won the penalty on him. To move back around then to the scrums, BJ. First of all, first question: the 5 scrums in total, 3 penalties against Ireland. Do you think they were the correct decisions?
I've looked at them and I think they were. I think for me, Porter's unbelievable player, I suppose. But I think, kind of if you can say the weakest part of his game would be partly scrummaging. And I think he's shown that. I mean, a couple of decisions, again, I look back at the games Ireland have played against big packs. And I think he was quite lucky against South Africa. O'Keefe actually went after him after the first scrum and says, you need to lift your elbow up, And like, it was actually a clear penalty. Later on in the game, I know Ireland came back at us in that game. And obviously, but I suppose when you do go in these cup matches, set piece is paramount. And I suppose when that cycle turns at scrum time, it is first and foremost, first scrum sets the tone and we go and we build that momentum through. But when that doubt starts seeping in, I suppose you get in that kind of a little bit of a survival mode, even at that pro level. I mean, you're thinking harder about the next scrum, decisions going against you. How do I correct this? And it definitely overflows into other parts of your game. You're trying to maybe change something, which you shouldn't have. You kind of just trust the process. So this momentum is big from a mental perspective, and I think that then overflows into other parts of your game. And I suppose the other set piece would be the line out. So look, I think again, New Zealand came and they knew they could kind of take them on there. And, I suppose when you create this momentum, it's also difficult for the ref then to kind of completely change that around. I know it takes a real proper ref to kind of make a big decision there. But I think Barnes knows exactly what he's, wouldn't say exactly, but he's one of the better ones in the scrum side. And look, he makes some good decisions.
Well, what I did think was quite frustrating around those scrums was, and to be honest, I'd agree with you as well. I personally thought they were penalties for New Zealand, and it's equally frustrating that Wayne Barnes was actually communicating quite clearly with Porter after the first one what he was and wasn't doing. So there was only one scrum in the first half. You can hear it on the ref mic start of the second half when the first scrum arrives, and I think Tyke Furlong can be heard saying to Wayne Barnes, "Did you check that scrum at halftime?" Barnes said, "Yes, we did. We thought the decision was absolutely fine." Now, this scrum goes off without a hitch, but 2 minutes later, Ireland are back down in that corner and they pretty much give away that same penalty. And if you consider the fact that, like, sometimes a scrum can, sometimes you can give away a lot of scrum penalties because you're getting dominated and you're almost a little bit helpless. But like in that situation, for all three of those penalties, Porter was quite dominant. He had a physical dominance over, I don't know, was it Lomax that was in front of him for all three of those? But he was essentially the aggressor in the situation. And you get the feeling that if he just held back and just held his position, those penalties weren't going to arrive. Essentially he would have been able to keep a scrum pretty stable. Now, I know they were all on New Zealand's ball and you kind of want to disrupt them a little bit, but like, as a prop, do you have to kind of be able to adapt to the situation and adapt to the referee and understand, okay, I've tried to go in at a bit of an angle here on the first one. I didn't get anything out of it. I'm probably not going to get anything out of it next time round again.
There's no doubt about that. And I suppose from a technical point of view, the loose head really should be in one part not moving first to be the aggressor. The loose head is not the aggressor. He needs to remain tight on his hooker, stable, hips facing upwards. His kind of strength is coming from his hooker and his back five, and that needs to be then work in sync. And I suppose it's the old kind of game of who moves first. Unfortunately, a loose head, in this case Porter, moves first. It does open a little bit of a space for the tight head, and they just drop their chest down through. And it really just, I suppose, opens that space up, and it looks a lot worse than it is. I think when we look at scrums, we want to show refs black and white pictures, not grey. And I suppose that's one part they know that they've been told with. A loose head anyway steps out or looks like he's stepping out, and it's any kind of grey picture, they're going to be blowing that, and that's unfortunately where he put himself. And as you said, rightly so, as a loose head, an experienced loose head like he is, should be holding and waiting. I suppose that's kind of at that point, and play that mind game about, listen, let's bide our time. Let's show some good pictures to the ref. And when a worst case scenario, we kind of on the defense, and basically let's let them play rather than those penalties kind of building up. And it's, again, sometimes you feel like you're in this pit on the game. You think cheap as everyone's against you, but in one part, it just takes that one scrum to be solid. Build that confidence again and go forward. And maybe that shows a little bit of the kind of the pressure that was in the game as well. Trying to get one over there. And again, as I said, from a technical perspective, the loose head is really, needs to be joined to his hooker. It's not an individual action there. you're waiting for that tight head to really get under pressure, and then be patient and take your time.
Yeah, and Johnny, like, I'd be wary that we're kind of obviously pinning a lot here just on Andrew Porter, obviously. And to his credit, after the I think it was the second penalty he'd conceded, 2 minutes later he comes up with a massive turnover in Ireland's half, and it launches a counter attack that, Ireland, they didn't score off it, but ultimately Ireland had a great chance off that counter attack that he started. But like, when you look through what happened after those penalties as well, they kind of are expensive. The first one that leads to New Zealand getting those 27 phases and going 3-0 in front. The second one, I know I said obviously he won a turnover back instantly, but it was probably the very, very end of that purple patch Ireland had right at the start of the second half, when they were gaining momentum, when they still had a man advantage at the same time as well. And then the third one was Jordie Barrett missed the penalty attempt off it, but at the same time, it shaved another 60 to 90 seconds off the yellow card, and again just killed a little bit of the momentum Ireland had after getting that penalty try.
Yeah, it's funny because the third one was actually a Ronan Kelleher turnover that he wasn't fully confident on. Obviously, the stage of the game didn't want to give away a penalty and knocked on the ball instead, and he was so close to a turnover, which is when Johnny Sexton and Andy Farrell are saying small margins or fine margins, that's a case in point.
Oh, there were a lot of them.
And that's why I don't think you can be overly critical on how the game played out. Yeah, Ireland went away from, they weren't allowed to play the game that they'd like to have played. But there's such small things that decide these games. Like on another day they win it, and on another day New Zealand win it again. That's the flip of a coin how that worked out. But it's really interesting listening to BJ talking about the scrum, because like Andrew Porter had that in his game before, where he was so keen to be the aggressor in all parts of his game, and I think he did that 20 seconds in, turnover or penalty in the breakdown. And yes, he lost his feet and he didn't mean to do it, but he went raging in, trying to get that ball and trying to get the big play 20 seconds in. 2 minutes in is that scrum. And, I think if you were New Zealand, and Greg Feek was working there, wasn't he? Am I wrong on that?
Yeah.
But he worked with Ireland. So he knows, and the whole world knows that Porter is kind of showing that picture. He hasn't been penalised on it. So obviously he's getting away with it for so long until you get to the game where it matters, and he didn't get away with it. But New Zealand obviously knew that. And I saw other analysis saying that, Lomax knew, because the part I find interesting that BJ has said there is that you stick to your hooker, and he didn't stick to his hooker, he went for it, and that gave Lomax a little bit of space to get into. But if you look at the scrum, Lomax went in, that's obviously his job, like BJ said. But that's only me listening to analysis. The tight head went in, the loose head's going to have to follow him. But that picture to Wayne Barnes, no one, like, I don't understand this to that level. Definitely, I'm trying to all the time, but I don't. And it's only the props in the situation will tell you, no, he brought me in. Wayne Barnes, I don't care how good a referee he is. He could be the best referee in the world, the most experienced in the world. He will never see that. That's Porter's hips out and penalty to New Zealand. So New Zealand played that unbelievably well without looking very illegal. They played it so well. So there's big moments around it. I think the second one, Aaron Smith had just come back onto the pitch. I think he literally walked onto the pitch for that one. So you had a couple of attacking plays where Ireland could have gone ahead and they didn't. And then they get reinstated to 15, scrum penalty out of their own half. That's a huge psychological blow, So there's again, huge moments and small margins is what won the game in the end. And it's a couple of points, but these are the things that you have to track along the way, big moments along the way.
You mentioned,
and I just want to comment on that, what Johnny says now about the yellow cards. I know you're going to mention that later, but that was a big part of the game that Ireland didn't take. I don't think they scored over that time. And
they scored just after the Aaron Smith one. They got their try, but during the New Zealand got won the second yellow card 3-0. So it was just after the penalty try. So that was the crucial one.
That was the crucial one, exactly. And I mean, during that time, that attritional play from Ireland that they do play and keep that ball in hand and how they work those phases, should have gotten some reward there. And I wonder if that was another kind of, real mental kind of, I suppose, difficulty around that, and them not making any inroads around that, and actually then New Zealand lifting themselves and they taking real confidence from that, So I think that was another kind of thing that New Zealand could take, kind of confidence. And suddenly their man comes on and, they just said, well, run at us. We'll do 34 phases. No problem, And again, as Johnny says, it's just such fine margins. And those are the little things, as we've known and we've seen with both quarterfinals this weekend, that that could tip either way, and the team that takes advantage of those are the ones that win.
Johnny, you mentioned the kicking earlier on and the kick battle, and certainly in the air it looked like Lester Fanganuku and Will Jordan probably got the better of the Irish backfield. What was your overall impression of are you talking about, when you mentioned the kicking there, are you specifically talking about high kicks up and unders, or even just those little chips through from Bowden Barrett and Richie Mo'unga in the first half?
Yeah, I just happened to stumble across a stat beforehand that I think Ireland were the top scorers from line-out in the whole competition before that game. So then when you see, and it's funny when you don't know these things, you're like, geez, New Zealand missed touch. They didn't miss touch at all. They went contestable. They went on the pitch, and it's funny, like, that we don't know at this level, that they're the things they're talking about. So they obviously kept the ball in play, and that's why the ball in play time was as high as what it was, because they meant to do that. Whether they thought they could get Ireland in the ball and play time, or whether they thought they'd just take them away from set piece, I'm not entirely sure, because they obviously disrupted the set piece to a degree as well. But then when you look at the kick battle, yeah, they won some back, definitely. But also the first try that broke the game up, that went 13-0 ahead, that was a kick battle that, I think it was kicked long to Lowe, and Lowe kicked it back, and then Barrett chip kick, gathers, and fast play. And when you look at it, it's everyone says, like, Jordy Barrett to Fanganuku, is it, or Ioane? And
it was Fanganuku to Ioane and back to Fanganuku.
When you look at the pass before that, it's Tyrell Lomax at the kind of traditional 10 spot. First pass, just shipped it to Jordy Barrett. It's a collective understanding. It's unbelievable. So it's not just, their fullback won it back and they're 12, slinging it wide to their other backs. There's a prop in the middle of that, tight head prop. Brendan would be proud of catching, passing, and getting their attack on. And that's such fast ball. That's the kick battle that I'm talking about, winning the territory, winning possession, fast ball, catching them on the hop a small bit, and bang, bang, and they're in the corner. Like, that's, and I think they stuck with it. There was stats there this morning that I saw. New Zealand had 34 kicks, I think, to Ireland's 20. And Ireland did try and kick the ball in some stages. They were kicking them behind. I think they actually panicked a small bit in the second half. You had Mac Hansen going right to left, and off his right foot tried to kick one through. I know he can do it, but that's a difficult kick. And then when it gets blocked, you're not surprised. He had another nice one into the opposite corner, left to right, that he executed. He just missed the tackle on Barrett, didn't he? And then that was when his calf was in trouble. But like, Johnny Sexton with a chip ahead for himself. I have seen him do it, but when was the last time you saw him do it? Normally when you're in control, you chip for someone else who's onrushing, but chipping for himself, and then the mark got called. I think the kick selection was based off not winning the gain line. I think New Zealand kicked on the front foot, and it was absolutely their kick strategy, get out of their own half. Even when Aaron Smith was off the pitch for the yellow card, Richie Mo'unga kicked a box kick. It kind of went slightly infield, but that was obviously their strategy, and they were all bought into it. 34 kicks. I think was it South Africa or someone else was just one kick ahead of them or something like that, but they were quite high in terms of kicks in possession.
Yeah, I think I saw this morning all 4 of the quarterfinal winners at the weekend kicked more than their opposition, and New Zealand have 85% of possession in their own half was kicked in the game on Saturday. And it just goes to show as well, BJ, that we do complain a lot about kicking, and I think it's probably specifically box kicking people complain about, but people talk about when games become a kick fest. But you can have a brilliant game of rugby that is heavy on the kicking. It's no driver of whether a game is good or not,
especially when it cocomes off.
Yeah, and, as we'll get to with South Africa, because a couple of their tries in that first half came directly off targeting the French midfield.
100%, and New Zealand showed that, and there's a risk factor there. I mean, there's a risk factor, but what I suppose New Zealand also planned around this, and they know that risk will pay off. I suppose they're one of the best, if not the best, in their transitional play of loose ball. And I suppose if you create that loose play a little bit, the individual brilliance is really good. As Johnny said, they're just so connected with that. They understand exactly where to go from a default perspective. They get that ball back. They know exactly where they're going. And then the defense is just in tatters. And I suppose that's where it came off almost every single time for them. And as Johnny just alluded to, when Ireland tried it and Johnny tried it, it was kind of forced in one sense, maybe not a pre-plan, So look, kicking is again, as they say, the whole cliche is only as good as your chase. And I suppose that really is in line with our past 2 weekends about how we almost pre-plan that and understand and just back that it's going to come off, and we go and we just back it. And I suppose those are those key factors that pay off. And in the New Zealand game it did, and I suppose Ireland were on the other side of it.
Mm-hmm. And
But
Johnny,
just on that as well,
go ahead.
just on that, sorry, when you said it, kind of, you think about the kicking game ruining the game, that you want to run everything. We all think that France are all this jouet, play all sorts of rugby, but they kick the ball the most, you know. So like, obviously they didn't at the beginning, but they were quite close to it, and that's their strategy. You can see small little kicks in behind from Dupont, even when they're chasing the game. At times they kick them in behind. So like, you know, that kind of stops the whole idea of kicking ruins the game. Now dead kicks and not winning them back, and not. I think when you see, you know, Irish teams back along, I think Munster got a lot of flack for it. They didn't have that transition that BJ said. You know, New Zealand are so dangerous on transition. I think you're discrediting your own BJ. I'd say they're probably the best at the transition. You look at their tries that you were going to say, Neil. Their first 3 tries were off kick transition. You know, the first one was a simple box kick that, you know, just bounced off Wacky. I think it was at the wrong one, but bounced off someone, and Curtly Arons, they just picked it up and cantered in. So that was the first one. And you see the second one was most interesting because Lebach is like, you know, 30, 40 meters away from a group of 4. There's one person in between who's not a realistic option. And they're clearly kicking there to get it back. I remember Rob Petty used to do that with us, BJ, that there was a hit up the middle and then your centre and your full back just flake away to the touchline because there's a kick. And that's why it caught my eye, because there was like 4 of them waiting over there. Peter Steph Dutoit was over there a lot. And that's where Deolande got the line break from it, and there was a phase open and Deolande back line and he scored. And then the third one was transition as well. I know it's a poor pass from Dupont to Boy, and he was on the ground trying to flick a pass, which they actually got away with quite a bit. They had a lot of unbelievable handling. But
that comes from pressure.
Yeah, and it was Peter Septitoy. It was the pass to Jesse Creel, kick along the ground, all they try. So it's like unbelievable how well they transition, but they know what they're doing. They know why they're doing it. And the spark, when they see a little fumble, you see the whole thing spark up and everyone's looking for it. And it's not just lazy, oh, where's it gone? On the ball, move, and then they're gone again, you know.
Johnny, just to hop back in with one final point on the Ireland game, and we'll go back to South Africa and France then, but obviously it would be remiss of us not to mention Johnny Sexton and Keith Earls as well, who've finished up. And as Andy Farrell said afterwards, like this is very much the end of an era now. Peter O'Mahony said it afterwards as well, that he'll have to give a good bit of thought to his own future. I'm not sure, did he mean test rugby or rugby in general? His contract is up at the end of the season. He's 34. You have other guys there like Conor Murray, like Bundyaki, who are 33, 34 years of age as well. So in 4 years' time, there is going to be a very, very different looking Irish team out there. But, and I suppose we'll talk about that maybe a little bit more in the weeks and months to come. But the final thoughts, you could see it after the game, just how badly the players had wanted to do it for someone like Johnny Sexton, and pretty much all of them said it afterwards in the press conferences and in the mix zone when they were speaking to the media. Just how big the motivation was to give Johnny Sexton the send off he deserved.
There's one thing before I go into that. I think when you look at the age profile of the team, and you do have a lot of 33, 34-year-olds, and we assume that they're going to be done as well for the next World Cup cycle. But I think Johnny Sexton has shown us that let's not discount them. But at the same time, he's an outlier, you know. So I don't know if Peter Mann is going to the next World Cup at 38, and Conor Murray and Bundyaki and these lads, especially when they play such an attritional game, some of them. And Cian Healy's 36. You know, I think the disappointing part of that for Earlsey is that he didn't get to have a proper walk around the pitch really in his gear, if you know what I mean. And maybe Cian Healy won't get the same, you know, whether he stays on or not. But just back to your point, I think Johnny Sexton fighting through the last 2 years of people having all sorts of comments on him, saying what he should and shouldn't be doing, and whether Ireland should and shouldn't select him. I think he's proven his point time and time again, and he's proven himself again in this World Cup. Ireland are a different animal with him. They're going to miss him terribly, despite what I believe is coming through. And you know, obviously you can see that, like you said, through what the players were saying. It was nearly like, yeah, we're knocked out of the World Cup, but the bigger issue was we didn't give Johnny what he deserved. I think it was actually quite stark how little they were talking about the World Cup exit and how much they were talking about Johnny Sexton. You know, so I think, you know, there's an outside perspective on what he is and, you know, how he handles certain situations. But by God, like he's an unbelievable guy. I think unbelievable figure for Irish rugby, and I don't think you can underestimate what he's done for them. So I think he deserves every bit of pouring people's hearts out over him. I think he deserves every bit of that.
And BJ, it's fascinating to think that 4 years ago, a lot of people wondered, had we stuck with Johnny Sexton too long? He was 34 at that stage. And I think people were wondering, should maybe he have been kind of slowly pushed towards the exit door a year or so before that World Cup? Whereas you look at him now, he's gone out 4 years later and he's playing better than he has probably been at any stage in the last 3 or 4 years. Like, he's pretty close to the top of his game now that he is retiring. It's a remarkable turnaround.
4 more years. No, it's unbelievable. And I mean, that sport really, as ruthless, it's just so ruthless, as you say. People want your head and you kind of don't understand the process about kind of integrating and how important Jonny is to the side from a mental perspective. Even if he's not on form and, you know, he's kind of biggest critic, he'll tell you. I mean, what he brings is that calmness and that flow. I mean, when he's on the field, that Irish side is just a different animal. It just flows and we understand how it works. And he's just that kind of, you know, brain behind it, really. And I suppose, you know, he's shown now, has his maturity, the experience. I mean, the class of him as a player, how he's kind of, as you said, finished off on a huge high. Unfortunately, not on his terms in the sense of the outcome of the World Cup, but in that sport, and it's ruthless. There's no one really at this level kind of getting fairy tale endings. You know, it's but yeah, you'll be kind of, I don't know, from our perspective, if he's Ireland's best ever. A lot of those words are going around, but he's definitely one of the best of the Irish ever. And look, you'll kind of, I think, look back now, and I think I'm not too sure how many years he's still got, you know, on the provincial side, but it looks like he's got a few more left in him anyway.
So that's Ireland, New Zealand, arguably the best Rugby World Cup quarterfinal ever. For 24 hours, and then South Africa and France just lit up the Stade de France. There was just so many fascinating things in this game, BJ, and it was a remarkable game of rugby anyway. But then also you just had these handful of bizarre things, these random incidents, like the mark being called off a scrum, Thomas Ramos's conversion being charged down. You had Cheslin Colby attempting a box drop goal attempt. Like, so many just bizarre little random things that we wouldn't have seen in a game for 20 years as well. It was a game that had absolutely everything.
There's no doubt. I mean, it was incredible. To and fro. What a spectacle, and so entertaining. I think if you didn't know what rugby was, you'd come in there and just think, what a game.
Yeah.
You know, and incredible. You know, two juggernauts going at each other, especially what we kind of expected, you know. In one part, but we didn't know it would happen in that way, you know. And I suppose the one side of talking about the inches in these big games would definitely look at kind of Cheslin Colby's charge down, you know. I think Cheslin Colby's, you know, it ended up, someone told me during the game, this could be a massive turning point in the game, and it was, you know. And I mean, that's the kind of inches you talk about, you know, the bizarre things. Like, I've even asked how many people have ever seen kind of how quick Willemse made the decision on a scrum. And I suppose, as we've heard from Rassie now, it was pre-planned. You know, they knew that they had to, you know, they didn't want to give the kind of French any lineouts. They wanted to kind of sap their legs, get them tired, and bring them into scrum. South Africans were, you know, confident enough at scrum time, bring them into the scrum, even in their own 22. Again, another mental statement, you know. It's like, I'm sure the French side thought, what's going on here? You know, I can't believe we got this opportunity to kind of, you know, scrum them in their 22. And then South Africa obviously, you know, went from there. And look, I mean, it was just filled with all these kind of bizarre moments, but I suppose that's what made it a spectacle in itself. And again, as I said, that the tries were just quite incredible. You know, some off 2 phases, and there you have it. And I suppose we look back at this game and definitely be, you know, stand the test of time. And I suppose we were kind of in one part, you know, happy enough to get on the other side.
Yeah, and Johnny, BJ mentioned obviously the taking the scrum off the mark in the 22. It feels like such a small little thing to be talking about in the context of what was such an unbelievable game, but the explanation, I presume you saw it as well, that Rassie Erasmus gave in the press conference afterwards for what their thinking was behind it. Like, it really does show that for someone we love to talk about as being a controversial figure, at times a bit of a joker, at times maybe crossing the line a little bit too much. But when you look at that, when you look at something like the 7-1 split and the way he thinks about the game, it's just another reminder that Rassie Erasmus is a remarkable innovator in the game, and seems to be thinking about it in a way that not many coaches, if any other coaches, are thinking about.
I think you've actually put that very well, because I was just going to call him a genius, but like a remarkable innovator is a really nice way.
Mad scientist as well, like you.
Yeah, and he is. But when you bring it back to it, like doing these things that are a little bit different, is grand if you've got an opportunity to do it and people think you're mad for doing it. But as a coach, you have to go out on that sword. So if he lost the game, he has to be able to stand up and say, yes, I did go for a scrum off the mark. And yes, I did do this. And yes, I did do that. Yes, I did hold up a traffic light. So like, I think you have to be able to level with yourself that this is the right decision and that you can back it whether you win or lose. That's a big part for me as a coach, that you have to be able to explain it. Like when you win, it's easy to go, yeah, I've done it and have a laugh off it, but he's not laughing at that. He means it, So I think that's the remarkable bit about it for me, that he thinks so differently, but he believes it's the right thing to do. He's not just doing it to go after the status quo, he's doing it because he believes it's the next way to keep South Africa on top of the game. And at the moment, you feel like they are on top of the game. They did it in 2019 with his remarkable innovation, maybe around his environment and what he did for the country and bringing them all together and getting them all the turnaround from 2017 to 2019, backing up a World Cup. Let's see if he can do it, because it's surely the hardest thing he'll do. I know New Zealand have done it, but like backing anything up is ferocious, because you're the target's on your back. So the fact that he's able to, the clarity of thought that he has around these things, that's what I find incredible. So we won't slag him off anymore. I think he's winning this one.
And just on that, I mean, just want to say on Johnny there, one thing backing your plan as a coach, but another thing getting players to buy into that, for the game and the plan. I mean, as a player, you almost got these kind of habitual habits within the game. You understand the pressure and you kind of know what to do around those areas. But what Rassie, gets done is the full buy-in for the plan in the game. And if it comes off, well, then we win. But everyone needs to be on that mark, and it's times, as I said, that these are risky situations. But it comes off, and it only comes off because you have the full buy-in, and that's the key with them. I suppose that it's in line with their defense. Their defense is that buy-in that we know when they come off the line, everyone needs to buy in. One person holds or is a little, and the guy breaks it through, and it's a try or it's points. So I suppose they've developed this mental kind of, I suppose, attribute, over the years as a team and a squad, as a culture. And that coachability, Rassie speaks a lot about, about players and how they fill in with the culture and how they fit in with the team. So he's managed to do that. And that's another big part of his coaching, kind of persona, that he's managed to do this, and I suppose that's why the players play for him. They back the plan 100%. And if it doesn't come off, and you can see the kind of way Treacy speaks about it, he's just almost kind of quite relaxed and said, well, yeah, we kind of had a plan and we went with it. He doesn't really show pressure at any times. He's not stressed. I mean, it's almost like, well, if it came off, it comes off, and thankfully it came off, So it's an unbelievable environment to be involved in, I'm sure.
You're right, they're like indoctrinated, aren't they? And that goes into the kick strategy as well, because if you're on the halfway line and you're telling a player to kick it up high over there, they'll be like, sure, I can play ball here. Like, players want to play, So if you players will kind of say, but why am I kicking it? I want to play it. And you have to be able to show them or get them to believe that this is the right thing. Obviously, it's quite easy when you get 3 tries off it, but he's done that before they got the 3 tries in the France game. So like his buy-in, BJ, you're spot on. It's unreal, isn't it? The way he gets people just believe in his plan, and you can see the way they spark after they get turnovers and all the rest of it. That's what they're waiting for. And now we're in, and it's a lesson, I think, to coaches as well, that it's not just ideas, it's the buy-in afterwards.
Yeah, and I do feel, while I probably would have preferred to talk a little bit more about that South Africa performance, I do have a feeling we're going to be talking a bit about the Springboks over the next 10 days, 2 weeks. So we can bide our time on that one. BJ and Johnny, thanks a million for joining us on the RTÉ Rugby podcast. Coming up in just a quick moment, I'm going to be joined by Illtud Dafydd to get the word from France and how they've been reacting to their World Cup elimination. Now, you're very welcome back to the RTÉ Rugby World Cup podcast. I'm delighted now to be joined by Illtud Dafydd, a journalist based for the AFP news agency in France. Illtud, thanks a million for coming onto the pod. Good to see you again.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
I was lucky enough to be in Paris over the weekend, and on Sunday afternoon before the France and South Africa match, took a stroll around, and obviously there were plenty of Irish fans kind of walking around like zombies, still in shock after what had happened on Saturday night. But like, there was just such a great atmosphere around there. It was kind of 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon. The French fans were settling in, sitting outside a few bars. There was a bit of singing going on. Really nice atmosphere. I'm curious to know, like, what's the atmosphere been like since? Because over the weekend, obviously during the day, you got a real sense that there was something happening in Paris, that this tournament was there. And I suppose I'd be curious to see what the reaction and the fallout has been in Paris, and with the likes of Ireland and the host France now out of it. Is there any sense that this tournament could get a little bit lost over the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, it's weird because Paris is such a big city that any sort of event kind of can get lost. Paris Fashion Week, unless you're in the right places, you're not going to know what's happening. Euro 2016 football, okay, because there was games in the Parc de France and the Stade de France, so it kind of took over the whole city to a certain extent. The Olympics next year will definitely take over because you've got events all across the city. But the World Cup did find it hard to you didn't really get the feel that the World Cup was on really until you knew it went. Yeah, exactly. Went to the stadium, etc. But over the weekend, you're right, there was a different feeling. So I went for a coffee with some journalistic colleagues on Sunday morning, and like in an area which is not touristy at all, behind Montmartre and Sacré-Cœur, if you know Paris quite well, which is a very residential area, no tourists, and there was Springbok jerseys everywhere. And you did feel, oh wow, this is getting somewhere now. This is momentum, and then it definitely helps that France were in the competition doing well, and yeah, it's just all come down to a damp squib now, really, especially because the Irish travel so well as well, and they would have traveled even more so for semi-finals and then the finals or third place playoff. The French get behind the national sport teams like no one other, especially they love jumping on successful bandwagons. But yeah, the day after was quite difficult. You felt like well, I finished work at 2 a.m, so I was tired anyway. And anyone who I spoke to, friends on WhatsApp groups, my wife was French. It just felt like there was almost like there was a bit of mourning to do and acceptance of grief and etc. etc. So yeah, it was dark. And then looking ahead now, it might be difficult for this tournament to live up to its expectation with France out and Ireland out. Monday morning, I got a few texts from people saying, "Do you know anyone wants to buy any tickets to the semi-finals?" Because people just want to get rid of them because they just don't want to go anymore, and it's understandable that to a certain extent. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what ticket sales and what the attendances are like on the weekend. But it definitely won't be the same atmosphere over the weekend in Paris as there would have been if Ireland and France and dare I say maybe Wales were in it as well.
Yeah, and I think that's the point a lot of people are making as well, as while it was probably the best weekend of Rugby World Cup we've ever seen in the tournament. It felt like it should have been a semi-finals weekend rather than a quarterfinals weekend, and it does feel like we're kind of in this strange holding pattern. No disrespect to England and Argentina, up until we're getting a New Zealand and South Africa final. The fact that the draw has kind of given us this layout it's certainly been criticised a lot in Ireland over the last 12, 18 months, ever since Ireland probably got up towards the top of the world rankings. I'd be curious to know, has it received the same level of scrutiny or criticism in France that it ended up being so lopsided?
I don't know. I would highly doubt. I think some people in Ireland maybe have made it too much of it. I might say, because from where I stand personally, not a Frenchman, not representing French media, just as an individual who likes rugby, I think you just have to be the best. You have to beat the best. To be that in the groups and the quarters. Obviously, not now in the semis if you're South Africa and New Zealand, or in the final, But then in France, it's been less because the French, I think Galtier is more like, actually, we'll just deal the hand that's given to us, and that's just how it is. And if you have to beat New Zealand in the opening game and then potentially would have had to beat them in the final as well, that's what they would have taken, and yeah, it was discussed all over the world, really, wasn't it? Because it was a talking point, and it was on reflection, World Rugby made a mistake, and I'm sure internally they are discussing about how they can make that better and maybe hold the draw 2 years out before World Cup halfway to be able to balance out a bit more, and then we should see a better, more balanced side of things in Australia in 4 years' time.
The reaction to the defeat itself then for France on Sunday, I'd be curious to know. Obviously, Antoine Dupont, for example, was quite critical of the referee Ben O'Keefe after the game. What has the coverage and the breakdown of the criticism been, and the scrutiny been? Has it been still largely on Ben O'Keefe, or like what I'm kind of getting at, has that shone a light off of maybe some of the failings of the French team, or of Galtier, or of mistakes they made in the game? Has the focus on the referee still been the main point over the last couple of days?
Yeah, it was interesting to be at the press conference to hear Antoine Dupont complain, because he really makes comments about referees, and I've never heard him for Toulouse or for France ever criticize any officiating decision ever, be that a TMO decision or a referee decision or like a foot in touch, the smallest thing. He just ignores it or brushes it in the carpet or just goes on with it. But he was, in the way that when the question was asked, his reply was, he asked the journalist back, "What did you think of it?" And then there was a moment between him and Galtier who it was as if Dupont wanted Galtier to reassure him and to allow him to go ahead to criticize the referee. Galtier did so then Dupont did so as well. And yeah, L'Equipe's on Tuesday. L'Equipe, it's the reasons of a failure is on the cover, and there's a man in the left bottom corner, which is Ben O'Keefe. And so yeah, they're still, to quote Dupont, they're still bitter, because he said he didn't want to be the bitter individual or a bad lose after the game, but they are still bitter. They're still frustrated. Yeah, there's an element of self-criticism, definitely. Bizarrely, there's some people asking about Galtier's future, but he's got a contract until June 2028, and he will still be there. That's 99.9% sure. And yeah, there's obviously some criticism regarding that they were tactically outdone in the end, and maybe South Africa outdid them with the substitutions, definitely in the last half an hour. But apart from that, it was a really good game, wasn't it? And I think that the first half an hour was probably the best rugby we've seen all tournament, really, I'd say, and it's just it's a shame for France that's happened, but it's great for guys like Siya Kolisi, who probably will end his Springboks career at the end of the World Cup, and hopefully he can finish it with retaining the trophy.
Yeah, it's but like you mentioned, that first half an hour, the two games I found remarkably similar from the atmosphere and the crowd point of view, where in the Ireland-New Zealand game, obviously the atmosphere was rocking for that opening half and before the game as well. And as the match wore on, despite the fact that the Irish crowd were there in such numbers, you could really sense the tension. There wasn't as much singing going on in the second half, as people just got very nervous. And similarly in Paris on Saturday night, where Le Marseillaise came out about 5-6 times in the opening 40 minutes. And then midway through the second half, I heard it again. I thought, I haven't heard that in about an hour. Like they really tapered off, and the nerves obviously came in. But the other part I'm interested to know, with the scrutiny, how much has Thomas Ramos's conversion been spoken about? And I mean, ultimately, it's a 1-point game, and to see a conversion blocked down, the only time I can ever remember it happening is in like a Barbarians game. I can never remember seeing this in a game of consequence. How much has that been highlighted, spoken of? Is there any scapegoating of him?
It happened to me once at university, so I know what happened. I know how Ramos feels to a certain extent.
It happened to you in university.
Yeah. So yeah, but it's a long time ago, and they're two very different standards of rugby. And there hasn't been criticism of Ramos, really. It's all been about Ben O'Keefe and how his officiating should have at least had a look at it, because Cheslin Kolbe is one of the quickest players in world rugby. He's Wade van Niekerk's cousin. He's a former Sevens player. Like, he's got gas, but is he that quick? I don't know. And also, he said, Kolbe said afterwards that he knows Ramos well, so he knows his movement. I'm sure they would have looked at it, because Rassie Erasmus and Jack Niamba they look at the most finite, smallest, meticulous details. They're the best at that. But there's been a lot of criticism. The amount of times I've seen that video of every single angle on social media this week. It's more towards the referee. Should I look at Ramos is not got away with it, but there's no pointing at fingers at him, and I think that's also because of his character. He's such a reliable kicker on the field, and he's a great player to watch. And off the field, he's such a nice guy. You never see him come out and say negative things or be brass. He's just a normal bloke who plays rugby. So I think that might play a part in it as well.
Obviously, in Ireland, we're dealing with the likes of Johnny Sexton retiring, Keith Earls retiring. There's a few others who maybe in the next couple of years will be contemplating the same as well. Peter O'Mahony suggested he'll be considering his future over the next few months. After the France game, Winnie Atonio, Roman Tafafanua, both retiring from Test rugby at least. Are there any others that you're expecting, or players that are likely to be considering things over the next 12 months? Like, what's that transition going to be between now and then? Obviously, there's still a very, very young core of the team with Dupont, with Roman Ntamak, Jalabert. There's quite a lot of guys who are in that peak age of the the early and mid-20s that have one or even two World Cups ahead of them. But are there other guys who are going to be considering things over the next 12 months?
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. The age range and the age profile of this as a France teams, apart from Taufik Vanua and Antonio, they're all between 24 and 26, 27. Okay, Galfico was 29, but you'd think he could be able to go on for another 4 years. Jonny is 31, which so potentially I think he would be the third one to retire or not make it to the World Cup. He might push out for a few Six Nations because he's so powerful and such a great player, you know. But at the same time, they've got plenty of resources behind to replace him. Yormo, Fana, and Arthur Vincent were in the World Cup squad. Emilien Gaetan, who was the top 14's top try scorer last season, he was the France under 20s captain. He's also an option as well. So they've got choices there. But across the board, I think they're quite safe. Dupont will only be 30 by the time the next World Cup comes around. Greg Alldritt is the same; he'll be 30. And some people say that between the age of 28 and 30, that's your peak as a sportsman. So
a frightening thought.
Yeah, France looking even better, but then I don't know. But there won't be too many changes player-wise, but coaching-wise, backs coach on Labit's going to Stade Francais as director of rugby. Cam Gazelle, the lineouts coach, is going there as head coach. Thibaut Giroud, who's the very influential head of physio and conditioning, he's going to Bordeaux-Bègles. So there's a few more changes, I'd say, in the backroom staff, but that's already been sorted out. Fabien Galtier already knows who's coming in, so there's not too much change there, despite they're being changed. Galtier's planned stuff already and knows who he's going to have for the next 4 years. So.
Yeah, and then the final thought, is there any... It's curious to see over the next weeks and months what the potential hangover is going to be between the players and the coaches and even just the team in general. Like I'm curious to see how both Ireland and France are looking when they meet in Marseille for that opening game of the Six Nations in 2-3 months' time. Yeah,
it's something Gregory Alldritt said in the mix on afterwards that, okay, maybe this was, I don't know how authentic he was in saying this, but he did say it, that we're lucky that we've got the Six Nations in 3 months' time. For that Ireland game could come around quickly. And also they've got big stakes in the top 14 in the Champions League, the Champions Cup, because French clubbery is so strong, a bit like the Irish domestic scene, that the guys want to play for the provinces or the clubs, you know. Big inter-pro derbies on the way or big Champions Cup fixtures on the way. Okay, it's nothing to compare with World Cup quarters and semis, but it's something to hold on to, I guess. And there's a bit of pressure from the French clubs to get the players back as well, because they missed them, especially someone like Toulouse who had a dozen players missing. So
yeah, I'd finally then, out of curiosity, actually, when would you expect to see a lot of the big hitters in particular back in top 14? Like, we're still curious to see from an Irish point of view. Generally, the Irish players probably get a little bit more time off than the French would, and I think it was yesterday, Connacht, for example, at their press conference were saying probably 3 to 4 weeks. For if you're talking Connacht, it's probably Mac Hansen and Bundyaki are probably in the 4 week mark at least. Maybe someone like Finlay Bealham, who didn't play as much, could be 3 weeks. What are you expecting to see in France in terms of getting those guys in the squad back into games?
Yeah, the French players won't have that much, definitely, for sure. No, but right now there's a really healthy relationship between the league and the federation. So with the agreement they had before the World Cup, that if France were knocked out of the quarterfinals, then the players would have to have at least 1 week off totally holidays, and then 5 days training, and then they could play. So you would say that maybe they could be back in time to play the fourth round of the top 14, which is the first round of the World Cup, which will be the day after the World Cup final on the 29th of October. But it's highly unlikely that a lot of the French equivalents of Bundyaki, so Joe Dante and Mac Hansen, so Damien Penaud, will go straight in to top 14 games that weekend. But the guys like on the bench, so Finlay Bealham's example would be, I don't know, Dorian Deguerre maybe, could go straight back in to play for Toulouse on that fourth match there at the end of October. So yeah, like all players deserve a rest, every single one, you know, because they put so much, especially maybe the French and the Irish have done less work because guys from like Samoa have gone all the way over there to the Pacific and come back and been away from their families and now going back straight into club rugby. So yeah, it's another example of why a lot of people think that global calendar should be discussed more and be brought to the fore, because this would help people get more consistency, and player welfare would be far more of a priority. So yeah, but yeah, the French players will be back sooner than later, I'd say so.
Yeah, it never ends. Champions Cup around the corner and Six Nations not too far away after that. Listen, Illtud, it's been great chatting to you. enjoy the last few weeks of the Rugby World Cup, and I'm sure we'll speak to you again possibly before the Six Nations.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
The RTÉ Rugby World Cup podcast, sponsored by Bank of Ireland.